Greetings, YouTube. For those who have been on my channel for a while, you might remember I reviewed a book called Weapons a while back, a few months back. And I said that that would be the perfect book as the foundation of any weapons reference library. It should be the first book you buy, in my opinion. And I still stand by that. However, it doesn't mean it should be the only book you have in your weapons reference library. Pretty much you'd have to have more than one to call it a weapons reference library. Another book that you should really consider purchasing is this one. It's a hardcover book, and it is called A Glossary of the Construction, Decoration, and Use of Arms and Armor in All the Countries and in All Times, together with some closely related subjects by George Cameron Stone, often referred to simply as Stone's Glossary. Now, this is the 1961 hardback edition. I purchased this 14 years ago for $40 in a used bookstore. This was before I had access to the internet, before we had access to Amazon. And at the moment, you can go to Amazon and find copies of this particular book in very good or acceptable condition in like the $15 range plus the $4 shipping. So it's not a really heavy buy-in if you want a copy. Now, why do I think this should be part of your collection? Well, it's a big book. It's got a lot of references. And it's full of some excellent photography. Lots of excellent photography. Armor, weapons, from all over the world. It is not a misnomer, the title. Now, this particular copy is not actually in the best shape. I would love to get it properly rebound, but I have not been able to find someone in the area that could do that for a reasonable price. Getting books rebound is not cheap. Now, this is not a perfect book in its content. It is not quite as inclusive as Stone would have liked to have thought when he was originally published it. There are gaps in its coverage. He shows a little bias in here and there. He is human. He is not the most objective of editors, I guess would be the best way to say it, because he's compiling information from other sources and from his own collection and from armories around the world. But it is an indispensable resource. It is a wonderful reference. And I don't know anyone who considers themselves to be a serious collector of weapons or a serious collector of at least reference books on weapons that doesn't own a copy. In fact, quite frankly, amongst those people who fit into those two categories I just mentioned, there is probably a bit of snobbery amongst them for anyone that doesn't have a copy of this book in their weapons reference library. It's kind of like, well, you're not quite in the same club if you don't own a copy of Stone's. There's also a paperback version of this, which was released in 1999. I don't know for sure how much it costs, but it's probably less expensive because it's newer and paperback. You're not having to fight with people who are really into the whole collecting thing. But it gives a really nice overview, and the pictures are excellent. The weapons reference I just spoke about in my last review is all pen and ink drawings. Excellent pen and ink drawings, don't get me wrong. But there's nothing quite like photos. And this is a really nice overview of a lot of different types of weapons from different nations and over different time periods. Most of the time when you're trying to find that kind of source material, you're going to have to get very specific. You're going to be looking at swords or European weapons of this era, or Asian weapons or African. They're going to be broken into different very specific focuses for a reason, because you can go in deeper in each of those focus groups. So this is going to give you a little broader range. I find it very useful when you're looking for a reference for role-playing games, because it does cover a lot of things, and most role-playing games have a very similar broad, not particularly deep level of reference. So this is deeper than that, so it's going to be a useful reference for that. I can't say it's a great read. I would never want to sit down and read the book cover to cover. I have looked through the book cover to cover as far as the images are concerned and read passages that I was particularly interested in. He does a lot of coverage on Asian armors, in particular Japanese armor, which is hard not to. So much of Japanese armor is so visually stunning. There are examples of European armor which are great and very interesting, but I find that Japanese armor, by and large, tends to be more visually interesting because a lot of the time, a suit of plate mail looks a whole lot like a suit of plate mail. You know what I mean? A suit of full plate looks like a suit of full plate, unless it's made for a high-level noble or the royalty. But all of the Japanese armor I've ever seen has always been very interesting. A wonderful combination also of metals and bamboo and wood and leather and silk. There's just a different contrast and so many different media involved in it. I just find it more visually interesting. Also a lot more color. Very little of European armor has a lot of color in it, even though there were armors that were plated and enameled and blackened and what have you. But stones is a wonderful reference. Like I said, it's flawed. It's not perfect. But if you were to have weapons that I reviewed in the past, and this book here as the foundations for your weapons reference library, and then you begin to focus into specific topics that really interest you, I think you would be well served. I realize that this is probably going to be a video that only appeals to a very narrow margin of people. I know that at least one weapon collector will probably find this interesting. And there's a number of gamers that might find it interesting. I'm hoping that there are people outside that particular genre that will find both this book and this review of the book interesting. I was always consider myself very fortunate to find this book. I bought it, I believe, during one of my vacations, like in the first year of my first marriage. I believe it was 14 years ago. Back when I was much younger and a whole lot heavier. But I love the book. I refer to it on a regular basis. I cherish it. It's a touchstone in many ways for me. I enjoy it as an object. I enjoy it as just the knowledge that I have a copy. So maybe, just maybe, I'm one of those slightly snobby elitists.